It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Burning through the deadly impact of the wildfires, taking lives and property on the Greek islands and beyond. Losing their lives in the fight against the fires, the blaze-battling plane which crashed, killing both crew members. And the soldiers among more than 34 people killed in Algeria as wildfires burn through mountain villages and towns. Also tonight, a serious error of judgment. NatWest chief executive admits she did discuss Nigel Farage's bank accounts with a journalist. The belated justice for the victims of the Brussels terror attacks as 6 men are brought to court to hear they are guilty of murder. She deserved to live a life of opportunity. The tributes to Amber Gibson as her brother is convicted of killing her.
I'll ask you to restrict the questions to the football and to the tournament only.
And the questions for FIFA at the World Cup, as journalists are prevented from quizzing one coach and an official says he doesn't believe in equal pay. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. For the past 4 nights, we've been bringing you stories of the impact of the wildfires burning in Greece on local people and the thousands of tourists forced from holiday homes and hotels. There have, though, been lives lost, and today the scale of that became clearer. In Algeria, fires burning in the mountains near the Mediterranean coast have killed at least 34 people, including firefighters. And in Greece, 2 crew were killed when their firefighting plane came down. Well, we have reports from our correspondents in 2 of the fire hotspots tonight. In a moment, we'll hear from our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, who is on Corfu, on these scientists warning that the recent heat waves would have been almost impossible without climate change. But our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, has tonight's first report from Rhodes, a warning it includes pictures of one of the animal victims.
Dimitris has lost everything. Until Saturday, this was his stables. Now, only ashes remain. The building and cars have been decimated. In minutes, wildfires destroyed everything he'd worked for.
First of all, I lost my life. I don't care about the money, my life, because here was my life. I live here with them. And now, we have nothing.
Dimitris is based in Kiotari, one of the resorts which had to be evacuated.
So this was here?
It was over there.
This is what his business looked like less than a week ago. He managed to rescue the horses. It was too late to save the chickens.
I cried when I saw it the first time. I couldn't stop, I cried. And even I'm not the only one.
Many here have lost so much.
In the area that you see, that's the umbrella.
Yeah, this hotel managed to contain the fire to the poolside. Apostolos says they're ready for business, but there's no guarantee the tourists will come back.
If we don't have clients, the hotel it will be closed. It's something that for everyone is something common.
How has this affected you emotionally? Because you're living here and seeing businesses destroyed, but also fighting for your own livelihood in the hotel.
I don't have words. I can't say anything. It's so sad.
This fire season has already taken so much from Greece. In Evia, 2 Air Force pilots died after their plane crashed. In Rhodes, flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures. Once again, the flames are coming forward, putting more jobs, homes and businesses at risk. This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. But they aren't giving up. Greece has declared war on these fires. They will continue to fight until they win. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Rhodes.
It's the fire of the century, one local notable on Corfu told Sky News today, but the heat waves which create the conditions for such fires are already 2.5 degrees hotter as a result of global warming, according to a group of scientists. Our science and technology editor Tom Clark saw the impact at close hand.
They're racing against time on the northeast coast of Corfu. Fires are on the move again, and there are fears if they're not out soon, strong winds on their way will make control efforts futile.
It is a catastrophe because mainly the main income on this island is tourism. If we now have cancellations and people they don't want to visit because they're scared, it's going to be a disaster for this island, for every Greek island.
And it's a disaster that extends across the Mediterranean. In Algeria, huge wildfires have now killed dozens of people, including firefighters, trapped by blazes accelerated by powerful winds. In Sicily, Palermo Airport was forced to close temporarily as fires encroached on the runway. Extreme temperatures on the island for weeks have turned scrub into kindling, woodland into fuel. Turkey, which has sent aircraft to help Greece fight its fires, is battling blazes of its own, as is Croatia. Wildfires aren't unusual in the Mediterranean in summer, but these weather extremes are.
Intense heat waves create the conditions in which wildfires occur. And a new analysis of this summer's heat waves has concluded that the conditions we've seen across Europe would have been virtually impossible if it hadn't been for human-induced climate change.
The new report finds heat waves like the one we're seeing in southern Europe are now 2.5 degrees hotter due to man-made global warming. And such events can now be expected every 15 years in North America, 10 years in southern Europe, and every 5 years in China. And if we continue to heat the Earth to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, they will occur every 2 to 5 years and be even hotter.
If we really do everything we can to achieve the 1.5 target, that would still mean that this would be the kind of events we have to deal with. But if we don't reach the targets, and especially if we don't even try, then we will see much, much more extreme events.
Something that's becoming abundantly clear on islands like Corfu.
I would class it as the fire of the century for Corfu. We have to get prepared better because definitely it's going to change in the climate. We have very, very much hotter summers and for longer. And we're going to have heat waves every year. And we're going to become, they say, like Dubai for weather.
The science doesn't say every year will be like this. Heat waves will come and go. But on current trends, they'll come more often and go more slowly for decades from now on. Tom Clark, Sky News, Corfu.
Well, thousands of people have now returned from the Greek islands affected by the fires after being forced from their holiday accommodation, but many more are still flying out. Some stoically, others because they fear they'll lose their money if they don't go. Ashna Hurinag reports now on their dilemma.
As holidaymakers try to escape, others are trying to enter. In Manchester, check-in is still open for flights to Corfu, an island the Evans family knows may be dangerous, but no one is telling them not to go.
When we saw the news, obviously, a little bit dubious whether we should be going or not. But after looking in through social media and speaking to people that are actually out there, it didn't look quite as serious. So the concerns that we thought we may have first for the family going out. So we made the decision to go.
The Foreign Office has not advised against travelling to either Corfu or Rhodes, leaving it in the hands of families to make up their own minds.
I think we're in a situation which is quite unusual, that the UK government haven't said that it's against government advice to travel to these islands at the moment, which very much puts the responsibility with the tour operators and the individual to make that decision.
And so these passengers in Birmingham are taking a gamble with Corfu.
And no one said you can't go, but if we don't go, do we forfeit our holiday? I mean, or can we get compensation or rebook? But unless the government say we can't go, then I think we just forfeit the holiday, don't we?
But the adventure turned into summer holiday hell for Kelly Watson. Her first holiday with her son to Rhodes was spent in a makeshift evacuation centre after they were told their hotel was burning.
That said to us, "What hotel are you in?" And we told him, and he said, "I can't take you there, it's on fire." And we were like, okay, kind of assuming that we would be taken to a different hotel, perhaps. But he said, no, we've got nowhere to take you.
Helen has avoided these horrors. She was due to fly to the island next Monday, but found out her trip was cancelled via social media, and rebooking isn't an option.
To try and book something like to like, at the moment we're looking to pay an extra £3,000 on top of what we've already spent, and as a young family that's just completely unacceptable. Especially with young children, they've learned to sort of count down to the holiday date, so it's been really hard to explain to them.
More than 5,000 British holidaymakers are thought to be stranded. Yet more repatriation flights bringing them home are touching down, while others are flying into the unknown, prepared to take the risk. Ashna Harinag, Sky News in Wiltshire.
If a bank clerk had done the same thing, they would be fired out of hand, one former minister told us tonight, after the chief executive of NatWest admitted she discussed Nigel Farage's bank accounts with a BBC journalist. Dame Alison Rose said she had made a serious error of judgment. Mr Farage said she and the bank's chairman should resign. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso has the story.
As the bank of monarchs and magnates, Coutts thought keeping Nigel Farage as a customer would be a bad look. Trying to get rid of him has turned into a reputational catastrophe for the 300-year-old lender. And Dame Alison Rose, chief executive of parent bank NatWest, forced to apologise for discussing the issue with a BBC journalist. The former UKIP leader and television presenter isn't satisfied.
I think her position is totally untenable. I mean, she is the source. I mean, anybody, even down to a junior clerk in a bank, who breached the confidence of a customer would have to go. And the board are making this really rather clumsy attempt to rally around her. I honestly cannot see, and by the way, this is a non-partisan issue. This is not left or right-wing politics. This is about the British banking industry. It's about our financial services industry. It's about the biggest employer in this country. It matters. There's no way. I do not believe for a moment she'll be there by the end of Friday.
Dame Alison spoke to the BBC's business editor at a charity dinner after Mr Farage claimed he had been debanked for his political views. She said it was a commercial decision. I recognise that in my conversation with Simon Jack of the BBC, I made a serious error of judgment in discussing Mr Farage's relationship with the bank, she said. I recognise that I left Mr Jack with the impression that the decision to close Mr Farage's accounts was solely a commercial one. The NatWest board says it has confidence in the chief executive despite what it called a regrettable error of judgment. It has commissioned an independent review and hinted it may cost her some of her £5 million a year pay package. Alison Rose's grounds for apologising rather than resigning appear to be that she didn't discuss Nigel Farage's financial details with a journalist and was unaware of the dossier compiled by Coutts that said he was seen as a xenophobe and a racist. But with the bank still 38% taxpayer-owned and results due to be published on Friday, ministers and other investors may yet have the last word. Farage's supporters agree she should go.
Were it a bank clerk or your local bank manager that had done this, they would be fired out of hand. There wouldn't be any question about it. They'd be gone. It's an absolute breach of any reasonable banking code. And so I can't see how Dame Alison can actually survive this.
Bank bosses will meet with Treasury Minister Andrew Griffiths on Thursday to discuss customers' rights to freedom of expression. It may be too soon to bank on Alison Rose remaining among them.
So, Paul, can she survive?
Well, the board and Dame Alison herself will clearly hope so. It's a carefully calibrated attempt to try and acknowledge that she made a real error of judgment in discussing the Farage issue with a journalist, but deny the key points, perhaps one of the most fundamental charges you could ever level at the chief executive of a bank, that they discussed the personal details of a client with a journalist, and not just any client. Nigel Farage, a man with a knack for publicity and an eye for an issue. He's a very divisive figure, but he has raised genuine concerns here that aren't just shared by him and his supporters, but in Westminster and by the Prime Minister, among other ministers who have said they have deep concerns about banks using political views to use against customers and deny them bank accounts. Should be said, NatWest still haven't apologised for denying or removing his Coutts bank account. They just apologised for the process and this conversation with the journalist. It's still going to be a long week for Alison Rose. Banks will be called in, including NatWest, tomorrow to see the City Minister Andrew Griffiths to discuss freedom of expression among their clients, to hammer home that the government does not want banks discriminating on the grounds of people's political views. And then their results on Friday. A big moment in the year for any bank and an opportunity for investors to take a view on the bank's performance. The government remains a nearly 40% shareholder. So the view of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, who interestingly we've not heard from yet, will be crucial here. It's a big question. Will they really take the decision to decapitate one of Britain's biggest banks on political grounds? For them, at least, the political judgment is straightforward.
Paul, thank you. It is 7 years since the attacks on Brussels airport and metro system, which left 32 people dead. Tonight, 6 men were finally found guilty of the killings. They include one of the men behind the Paris attacks of the previous year. Both were claimed by the so-called Islamic State. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
This, the aftermath of terror. 7 years ago, people huddling in Brussels airport, moments after 2 suicide attackers had detonated their bombs. You can sense the confusion and fear. But these people survived, traumatised but alive. An hour later, another bomb blown up, this time at a metro station near the European quarter of the city. 32 people died. Many hundreds were injured. Brussels that day, a city paralysed by fear, and the memories of all this run deep. Finally, the people behind these attacks have been convicted. They were brought into court under high security, accompanied by officers hiding their own identities out of concerns for safety. This courthouse adapted from an old NATO headquarters building. The evidence took 7 months to be heard. Among them, the man in the hat. Mohammed Abrini was one of the terrorists at the airport, but his bomb did not explode. He claims he had a pang of conscience, but he has been convicted. Also found guilty, Salah Abdeslam, born and bred in Brussels, but loyal to Islamic State, the catalyst for this violence. Abdeslam was on the run from French police after previously helping to carry out terror attacks in Paris in 2015. 130 people were killed then, mostly at the Bataclan concert hall. Abdeslam had been part of another terror cell that was planning a fresh series of attacks in France when he was arrested by Brussels police. That's him on the floor. His arrest simply sparked the other terrorists into action. A few days later, they set off their bombs. These bombings were part of a wave of terror across Europe. They were the worst attacks in Brussels since the Second World War. Now the country finally has a sense of justice and of closure. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Brussels.
Amber Gibson deserved to live a life of hope and opportunities, her foster parents said today. Instead, she was sexually assaulted and murdered by her own brother. The 16-year-old was killed in late 2021. Connor Gibson, who is now 20, will be sentenced in September. A warning that Conor Gillies' report has details which you may find distressing.
Amber Gibson never knew her brother's murderous intentions in these final moments of her life. Lured to a secluded spot, a sister killed by her own brother. In November 2021, Connor Gibson enticed his sibling to her death, removed her clothes in this park, sexually abused her, inflicted blunt force trauma, and then strangled her. He'd been staying at this homeless unit where he was filmed disposing of his blood-soaked clothes. Moments before his arrest, he posted this chilling Facebook message: "We all miss you, especially me." Throughout this trial, the jury heard just how vulnerable Amber Gibson was. She'd spent much of her life in foster care and was living in a children's home at the time of her killing. And the jury was told the one person that she should have trusted was her brother, Connor Gibson, who sat in the dock throughout the whole of the proceedings with no reaction and no remorse.
I welcome the verdict today. It's the correct verdict. It won't bring Amber back, but hopefully it will bring some comfort to our family and our friends.
Another man who found Amber's naked remains was also found guilty of touching her body inappropriately instead of calling police. Amber's foster parents said she was the most giving, caring, loving, supportive and admirable person. She had the most amazing outlook on life, considering the suffering she had experienced, they said. Amber deserved to live a life of hope and opportunities. We really miss Amber. Life will never be the same again. Conor Gillis, Sky News, at the High Court in Glasgow.
Sky News understands that the arrival of the first asylum seekers onto the Bibby Stockholm barge docked in Dorset has been delayed until next week at the earliest. The Home Office originally said the first arrivals would be this week, with a plan for a structured increase in numbers. Now, treating a patient with type 2 diabetes costs the NHS 3 times of a non-diabetic patient each year. So with a near 2 million more people projected to be diabetic by 2040, you can see the likely impact on health budgets. A report published today says the NHS will need to shift its focus from care in hospital to care in the community as a result, as our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
There is no other treatment for me.
Joseph didn't think he'd live to see this day, his silver wedding anniversary. He's battled chronic lung conditions since birth. Now Joseph also has COPD and has been told it will take his life.
I've never been one to give up. I've always liked to fight. This is ultimately the biggest fight. I have just to remain as positive as I can, in the hope that something will be developed, even if not for me, but for other people who are just starting on the journey.
Without intervention, 1 in 5 of us could be living with major illness like COPD, cancer and heart failure by 2040. An ageing population and rising levels of obesity are cancelling gains in smoking rates and blood pressure.
These patients are vulnerable, they're elderly, so they will need looking after and someone to be caring for them. So if there's not that support, then they start to deteriorate, they don't drink enough, they get sepsis, they get reduced mobility, and then they'll be back in hospital again.
Within the next 20 years, an additional 1.7 million people could be living with chronic pain, and an extra 1.9 million more people are projected to be living with diabetes. And that has financial implications. A non-diabetic patient currently costs the NHS around £560 per year, compared with over £3,000 for type 1 diabetes and almost £1,700 for type 2.
There are also immediate pressures. Healthy life expectancy has been on the decline since 2010, and the number of people living with serious illness is going up compared with the number of working-age adults. And if that continues, it will have serious implications for a health system funded through tax like the NHS.
Advancements in technology and medicine could mitigate the growing demand caused by an ageing population with complex health needs. But for Joseph, they will probably come too late. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Parliament should decide if there should be indicative limits on the amount of outside work that MPs can do, according to the country's most senior ethics watchdog. Lord Evans, the chairman of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, praised work by Sky News on the Westminster Accounts project, revealing how money moves through the political system, which he said had helped transparency. He was speaking to our deputy political editor, Sam Coates.
How much extra work should MPs be allowed to do?
89,000 hours. That's the total amount of time all MPs have worked in second jobs over the course of this Parliament.
And who is giving the cash that funds their campaigns?
2 individuals in there who shut the door when we ask more questions.
Sky News has been investigating and showing the public how money moves through our political system. Lord Evans is the most senior ethics watchdog in the country, directly advising the Prime Minister. He says it's time for major reform.
Do you think there are some MPs for whom the focus isn't clearly on their constituents?
There have been some quite well-documented cases where it's hard to argue that this person is putting their main focus on their parliamentary duties, given the amount of time that they appear to be giving to other activities.
Is there something you think should be done now to change the system?
We've encouraged the House authorities, the parliamentary authorities, to look at whether there are indicative limits to how much time somebody is putting into their external interests. And I think that would be helpful.
In January, Sky News attempted to answer a simple question. Who was behind the donations going directly to MPs? It wasn't easy.
Is anyone in there? Does anyone work in there? There doesn't seem to be anybody here.
I don't think there is enough information about where money is coming from. I don't think it's easy to identify who is giving money. I think there are still risks of foreign money coming into the political process here. We made a number of recommendations on this. The government have not accepted those. We think that's a mistake. The rules are not strict, they are not rigorous, and they are insufficiently transparent.
The Prime Minister entered number 10 with a pledge to raise standards.
This government will have integrity at every level.
That work, it seems, still unfinished.
There have been frustrations because we have made what we believe to be appropriate and balanced independent recommendations which government has not taken up, and we think that's a mistake. There are a lot of things that need to be improved. There is certainly a big agenda for change still, that we need to address.
Last week, the government announced some changes to the system, tweaks, but not a major overhaul. That looks too painful this close to an election. Will things ever change? Sam Coate, Sky News.
Now, one of the armbands that players wear in the World Cup at the moment calls for an end to violence against women. But FIFA were accused today of stopping questions to a coach who has been accused of sexual misconduct, claims that he says are fake. And tonight there are questions for another official after he said he didn't believe in equal pay. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris has this report.
A
coach at the Women's World Cup challenged on accusations of sexual misconduct before FIFA stepped in.
I'll ask you to restrict the questions to the football and to the tournament only for this press conference. I'll go to the next question.
But Zambia's World Cup debut has been overshadowed by reports Bruce Moape coerced players into having sex with him and made threats to deter them from speaking out. Moape calls the allegations fake, but questions linger about why he's still leading the team.
There's no way I can retire without, but for no reason. Maybe your reason it's because of what you are reading from the media or from the press.
And attempts to ask the captain were shut down by Zambia's media officer.
I think
once again I would request.
I think that we'll not take those questions.
After losing their opening game to Japan, Zambia next plays Spain in Auckland. FIFA won't comment on any investigation into the coach, but football's governing body has partnered with the UN to campaign to end violence against women, a message on some captains' armbands. For rights campaigners, FIFA's activism is not matched by the rigour of their own investigations.
FIFA is absolutely refusing to put in place good governance measures to get sexual abusers out of sport, as in Zambia. There is no confidence. There's no reason for confidence that FIFA can investigate and get these predators out of women's football.
FIFA also stoked controversy at the World Cup today on the gender pay gap. One of their vice presidents, Alejandro Dominguez, said he doesn't believe in equal pay for players. Protests against poor treatment and underinvestment are rife in women's football. Spain had players threatening to quit. In the England camp, the Lionesses remain in dispute over bonuses. The World Cup platform being used across teams to challenge authority, advocate for change and create a safer sport. Rob Harris, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story on the front page of the Metro on the wildfires in Europe. Ring of Fire, their headline for tomorrow's paper. Well, tonight we're joined by the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda, and the Daily Mail's deputy political editor, Harriet Lyon. Back in just a moment. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories. Wildfires continue to burn in parts of southern Europe and northern Africa. At least 34 people have died in fires in Algeria. Nigel Farage has called for the CEO of NatWest to resign after she admitted to discussing his bank account with a journalist. And 6 men have been found guilty of murder for their part in the 2016 Brussels terror attacks, which left 32 people dead. Hello there, you are watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda, and the Daily Mail's deputy political editor, Harriet Lyne. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight, so welcome to both of you. As ever, let's check out the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Metro, with the striking headline, Ring of Fire. The Metro covering the blazes stretching from France to Algeria. The Telegraph leading with the NatWest chief executive, Dame Alison Rose's admission that she was the source for the BBC's story about Nigel Farage's banking affairs. How can Alison Rose keep her job amid the Farage furore? That's the question the Daily Express poses. The Financial Times, meanwhile, understands that Rishi Sunak intends to attract the votes of landlords by loosening the environmental regulations with which their properties have to comply. And according to the Eye, the policy which forces manufacturers to pay for recycling could also be scrapped. The Guardian reports that the UN wants smartphones banned in schools for the sake of children's well-being. And the Star has the story of a pig whose owners claim she's a talented artist and has made them more than £1 million. Well, don't forget, scan that QR code that you see on screen during the programme and you can check out for yourselves the front pages of the papers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them, to Sonia and Harriet. Welcome to both of you. Once again, Sonia, you know, the fires in southern Europe and indeed northern Africa making the front pages, including the Metro, now calling it a ring of fire.
Absolutely, and I think that the scale of these fires is really extremely alarming. There's a number of angles that the papers are covering this from. There's obviously the angle of what's been happening with British tourists, for example, on the Greek island of Rhodes. These fires are affecting other very popular holiday destinations. But when you zoom out, there's also the question of the link with climate change and carbon emissions. And the scientific consensus is very much that this level of heat wave would not be happening. I mean, it's almost impossible to think of this happening without man-made climate change. And so I think, unfortunately, this is one of the consequences that we are going to be seeing occur more frequently. Scientists say, you know, we could be looking at experiencing these heat waves in southern Europe every 2 to 5 years. There are a number of factors, these record temperatures that we've been seeing in Sicily, you know, records broken by more than 2 degrees, temperatures of over 47 degrees in some parts of Sicily, and the fact that you've got lots of very dry vegetation in southern Europe over the summer, creating these kind of fire hazards. And, you know, when you listen to the stories both of holidaymakers who are out there and what it's been like kind of fleeing the immediate danger, but also people who, you know, we've heard about lots of people who've lost their lives in these fires, you know, people really looking at losing their livelihoods, their homes, their businesses, their hotels. You know, the scale of the catastrophe and the destruction is really quite extraordinary, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, lives lost, including, if we delve inside the Metro, the water-bombing plane which crashed in the hills of Evia, one of the Greek islands now hit by these fires. But as you said, you know, testimony from Brits returning from abroad. There's one. I ran from the fire in my bikini. Kind locals gave me clothes. And right at the bottom, they talk about summer holiday limbo for Britons with trips booked to the burning Isle. About 30,000 would-be holidaymakers are stuck in limbo because of the wildfires on the Greek island of Rhodes, not to mention elsewhere, including Sicily, which looks like it's got in a terrible situation with wildfires as well at the moment. So what's to be done? I mean, Michael Gove's saying, yes, it's safe to go, I'm going. If the government doesn't say anything, Harriet, people don't get their money back. So there is a limbo, isn't there now?
There is a total limbo. It's a really awful situation for so many families to be in who will have spent hundreds, thousands of pounds on holidays and are now looking at these awful images coming from islands like Rhodes and thinking, I really don't want to go there, but I'm not going to get a refund on my holiday. And if you've got children or you are just excited about that trip, you're not going to get something similar for the same amount of money elsewhere at this short notice. So a lot of people are going because they can't claim a refund because the Foreign Office isn't advising against travel there. And that's the bar that many travel insurance companies will use. It's not just if the place is on fire, it's that the government is saying you can't go. And so until or if the government does that, people are still going to go there because they don't want to miss out on a holiday and all of that money that they have spent. But I mean, Michael Gove said today that he will still be going on holiday, as you referenced, to Evia. And I think many people will. But looking at these images, it's not the sort of place that anyone really wants to be going. And indeed, arguably, many islanders probably there do not want more tourists adding to this chaos on these islands. Though on the flip side, small business owners, hoteliers, etc., there equally don't want governments to ban people from going because that will cripple their businesses. And not all of the island in a place like Rhodes is affected. So it's a very, very tricky situation that families are having to decide for themselves what to do.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a dilemma on both sides, as you suggest. And in the meantime, those often ancient olive groves burning, the wildlife there, not able to escape, quite aside from the human part of all of this. And The Guardian, certainly in Tuesday's paper, talked about the link with climate. The climate crisis is undeniable. And doubling down on that on their front page again today in The Guardian, this is climate change, there's no magic defence, quoting the Greek Prime Minister on the front pages, Sonia.
Yes, that's right. And I think people living in Southern Europe are going to be extremely worried going forwards because scientists are predicting that these sorts of temperatures and hence these kinds of wildfires are going to become more common events. And the tricky thing is that big parts of Southern Europe are absolutely dependent on tourism. It's a main industry. If you look at an island like a Greek island like Rhodes, or for example, Sicily, tourism is so important here. And these kinds of events are catastrophic at the time, both for people who live there, people who are holidaying there, but they're also going to have long-term consequences, both on people's perceptions of going on holiday there. But in terms of the landscape, like the kind of environmental damage that is caused by these fires, it doesn't repair itself overnight or even, just in a year. You're talking about really catastrophic damage to wildlife, to local forests, changes to the landscape. So, these are the consequences of the climate crisis. And the issue for us as a sort of human race is that the link sometimes between individual decisions and decisions that governments take, and then these sorts of consequences can sometimes seem quite diffuse. But unless we really get our act together, we are going to be seeing more of these kinds of catastrophic weather events, and more parts of the planet that become essentially, it's not like these bits of Southern Europe become inhabitable, but there are parts of the world that will become inhabitable where people are living at the moment as a result over the next kind of 40 or 50 years. So this is something, I think it's really a warning to us that we have to take it really seriously.
Well, let's take a look at that juxtaposition with policy then, shall we? Two newspapers, the FT and the I, both have a picture story of the wildfire crisis on the top. There's the Financial Times, which pictures Algeria, in fact, where 34 people had died. The wildfires extending now into Tunisia, the paper says as well. And there below it, the idea being floated that Rishi Sunak is ready to overhaul green targets for landlords, the energy efficiency targets, to relieve pressure on the housing market. So there's a timing issue, I guess, with some of these stories. But anyway, Harriet, talk us through what the FT is talking about here.
Yeah, it couldn't really be a starker front page, could it, with that horrible burned out shell of a building or a home in Algeria, and then this row amongst Conservative MPs and, well, the Parliament as a whole over how you in the UK tackle the climate emergency and the timing of that, as you say. So the FT is talking about one measure that the government's looking at ripping up. And after the Uxbridge by-election last week, where while the Tories held on to it, it was narrow, and clearly Labour were given a pretty bloody nose as a result of the ULEZ policy. And so I think that's brought these issues into stark contrast about how you deal with policies which are obviously well-meaning, but are going to cost individual households significantly. And the timing of that. So when you've got a cost of living crisis, you've got bills going up, is it really the right time to be slapping a whole load of extra bills on households who are already struggling to deal with what might be seen in some quarters as a bit of a future problem when the net zero target is 2050, not, tomorrow. So it's the timing of these policies. The FT talking about the target for landlords to get their properties to category C in their emissions, the energy efficiency rating. And that's a pretty decent level to get to. Again, it's a really well-meaning policy. It's not good for renters to be in inefficient homes where their energy bills are high because they're leaking, all of their warmth out of the windows or whatever. But the cost of doing that can be pretty immense, and obviously is likely to be passed on to the tenants in those properties, again, sort of fueling this issue of inflation and crippling households in the cost of living crisis. So it's one of many policies that seem to be being kicked down the line a little bit by the government, or certainly being considered to be kicked down the line, so that they're not passing these costs on just ahead of an election, where they're likely to end up getting bruised at the polls as a result of them.
Yes, and another one on the front page of the Eye, which also has a picture of fires attempted to be fought at the top there. Blazes taking hold across Greece, Sicily, Turkey, Algeria and Tunisia up the top there. But below it, the story that the flagship eco-policy, forcing manufacturers to pay for recycling, is being booted down the road for a bit, Sonia.
Yes, that's right. So this is another row about green policies within the Conservatives, and this is specifically a scheme that would force manufacturers to pay for the cost of recycling their goods. And the Eye is reporting tonight that there's talk of the Prime Minister delaying bringing this scheme in as well as the regulations for landlords that Harriet just talked about. And I think when you zoom out of this, what's going on within the Conservative Party is, this is one of the big rows. It's that tension between we've got to act now to meet our net zero targets, to avoid the sort of catastrophic climate change and the catastrophic weather events that we're seeing in the fires across southern Europe as we speak, really, but that does carry costs. And I think personally it's extremely short-termist to be saying, well, we just can't afford to do this now, so we're going to push it back and back and back. I mean, governments in some ways may always do that because they like to think about the short term. They like to think about winning elections in, 2 to 3 years' time rather than the impact on the climate in 10 to 20 years. I mean,
So I'm going to rush you. Sorry, I've got a lot to pack in the next half of our programme. Yeah, the same argument with you, Les, which some say is regressive, whether that should be delayed. So that, you see it on both sides, I suppose, don't you, for many people. And Rishi Sunak always talking about the economic context that we're currently in. So it's something that politicians are no doubt wrestling with. Anyway, lots more still to come, including the boss of NatWest admits she was the source for a story about Nigel Farage's banking affairs. Discussing that in just a moment.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, his memories is all gone.
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
You got your political agenda.
No, it's honestly...
God love you.
And beyond the United States, I report from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem.
What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here, they know the truth of ISIS.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Sonia Soda and Harriet Lyne. Harriet, let's go to the Telegraph, shall we? Also the lead story, in fact, for the Daily Express. NatWest, Farage, and what might happen next. Take it away.
Yeah, so this is Dame Alison Rose admitting that the NatWest chief that she was the source of the BBC story, which inaccurately claimed that Nigel Farage had lost his account as a result of purely commercial reasons. They were also political, that played a part, his political opinions. And so she has today apologised to Nigel Farage for having leaked some details, although she says, which I think is important to be clear on, that she didn't leak private information. However, somehow Simon Jack, who was sitting next to her at a dinner the night before he broke the story on the BBC, said that night before she broke the story, must have got some kind of information from her in order for him to run the story. So tonight she's saying, I'm sorry, I didn't leak private information, but I did basically overstep the mark, made an error of judgment. And that has led to a number of calls for her to go. That revelation, I think there's a report in the Times that Number 10 wants her to quit, even though she says she's staying and the board at NatWest allegedly has their full confidence in her. I think it's quite difficult to see how her position remains tenable.
Yeah, Number 10 wants NatWest boss to quit over Farage. I think The Sun is also reporting that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is said to have serious concerns about Dame Alison Rose's handling of the NatWest Coutts-Farage affair. Presumably she was asked at this dinner, she didn't give numbers, details. Is she OK to keep going, do you think, Sonia, just quickly?
Well, she's clearly made a serious error of judgment, and she said that herself. Then there's the question of, whether she should resign over it or whether she should get sacked. I'm not sure it's serious enough to mean that she should go. I mean, she definitely did mishandle this. She should not have said, she should not have implied that the decision was taken on a sort of purely commercial basis. But I think, it is probably, people do make mistakes in jobs, and she has apologised. So I do think it's kind of up to the board of NatWest as to her future. And I think it would be, quite harsh in some ways to resign. But I think it raises much bigger questions about, about the sort of basis on which banking services are provided. I'm certainly no fan of Nigel Farage's political views. In fact, I think, some of them are fairly odious. But do I want to live in a society where banks are policing people's political opinions and sort of picking and choosing customers based on their political views? I think that's quite chilling, actually, particularly if you've got a situation where, several banks are turning you down, where one bank turns you down because of that, and then that acts as some kind of red flag for other banks. I don't think we know the full extent to which this is going on, but certainly the details of that report that Coutts did on Nigel Farage, it was clearly a commentary on some of his political views and his suitability as a customer for the bank based on that. They said, this is partly a decision about inclusion and whether he fits with the bank's values. And I quite frankly think that, banks are not there to do politics. They are there to provide services.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a talking point, certainly, hasn't it? Quite a defensive statement from Dame Alison as well, but we will talk more later. Both of you, thank you very much indeed. Sonia Soda, Harriet Lyon, lovely to have you both on. Thank you.